I want to welcome to the stage Trilby Beresford, our presenter for tonight on the Art of Screenwriting. Trilby is a screenwriting fellow from the American Film Institute in Hollywood. She's worked as a producer and as a screenwriter and has focused in more recent days on comedy screenwriting. In addition to that, she is also the coordinator of the Directing Workshop for Women at the American Film Institute. So with that, please welcome Trilby Beresford.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron, and thank you guys for having me and coming out in the freezing cold. I just got off the plane a few hours ago, and I was so shocked, even though I'd totally prepared for it. Okay, so, sorry. So I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes throughout the whole presentation. No, just for a second, I'm going to ask a series of questions that I want you to think about. Just think about them while I'm saying them, and yeah, everyone close their eyes, okay. What is the saddest thing that's ever happened to you? What's the most joyous moment of your life? What's the most shameful thing you ever did? What's the angriest someone ever got at you? When was the time you laughed until you cried? What's the most terrifying moment of your life? What is a story someone told you to save your life? When was the first time you said, "I love you"? You can open your eyes. So these are the words that I heard from one of my screenwriting professors on my first day at AFI. He said that most writers are writing movies that they've basically already seen. You ask them what's happened in their own lives, and they say nothing. But that's not true, is it? If you answer these questions, I think you'll find that there's a pattern in your emotional history that can help you with screenwriting. There's a pattern that's unique to each individual person, kind of like fingerprints, and that drawing from your own life is how you find your story. I heard this over and over for 2 years, basically, and I finally found it to be true. Whether you're writing a serious drama, a historical epic, a slacker comedy, fantasy, whatever you're writing, if you inject some of your own feelings into your story, it will make it resonate with an audience. Find out what you know about yourself, and I think it will make you more interested in other people, and you'll find emotional depth that can make your story more compelling. Because to write an unforgettable story, you go to where the pain is. And the most important thing in any movie is emotional truth. So my name is Trilby, and I am not fashionable in cold weather. So I graduated from AFI in 2011, and I moved to LA from Australia about 6 years ago to study screenwriting. So today I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to tell you, inform you, a few of the most important things I learned while I was there. So one of those things is structure. Some people think of structure, especially screenplay structure, as a necessary evil. I am definitely one of those people. But I also have come to think of it as a clear way to envision a script in my mind, sort of to have it make sense in my head. All right, so what are we talking about here? We're basically just talking about doing the work. As you begin to develop your script, it's necessary to envision it in 3 parts. It's just like a play. These parts are a simplified, broad stroke of your story and your plot. The more you understand structure, the better screenwriter you are. The better people will understand your screenplays, and the better idea you will have of your screenplay. Because screenplay writing basically demands you to write with efficiency. So there are different structures for different types of films, but whatever genre you choose, if you don't have a plan, basically your script is going to be poo. It's sort of foolish to think that you can write scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4, all the way to scene 200 and think it's going to be cohesive if you don't have a plan. It won't be cohesive, it will be incomprehensible. And I've written many incomprehensible screenplays because I didn't have a plan. So if you hate the idea of outlining your script before you write it, you have to get over that today. Outlining and planning your script is a way to make it tight and professional. It will help you edit your work up front. I'm sorry you have to stare at the poo. It'll go in a second. Basically, outlining lets you edit your work up front and drop scenes that aren't needed before you write them. It's an editing device, a magnificent editing device. And I never thought this, but after 2 years of grueling AFI trauma, basically, I understand this now. Okay. So let's see. This is Screenplay DNA. Structure like this supports character. You want to create a structure that builds in your screenplay. You want to have a structure that lets the reader know that you know what you're doing. If you have a 50-page first act and a 10-page second act, that is just wrong. Okay? So this is what a screenplay length looks like. All right, so let's go to Act 1. I don't know how many of you have written a screenplay or have read a screenplay, but basically, what are we doing in Act 1? We're introducing all the main characters, the theme, your point of view, genre, time and place, and your style. By the end of this point in the movie, you have to tell us what the film is about. This first act has to be completely gripping and engaging because basically you lose your audience in the first 15 minutes of any film. So I like to think of this part of the movie as the undisturbed state. Your character is basically going about their lives in their normal way until the disturbance happens. The disturbance is the inciting incident. Something happens and the story starts. The inciting incident is where the conflict announces itself. We see the predicament that your character is in and the tension around which the story will revolve. Will they escape alive? Will they rob the bank? So the inciting incident is usually something that happens to your character instead of something that he actively pursues. So like in Legally Blonde, the inciting incident is when Warner dumps Elle instead of proposing to her as she expected. Another thing that's really important in Act 1 is stakes. The stakes have to be clear in order to show the audience how and why the tension in the script is important to them. Or more importantly, what will happen if your character does not solve the problem. The stakes should be huge. The stakes should be a matter of life or death. And it often is. In Armageddon, Independence Day, Men in Black, War of the Worlds, Deep Impact, Contagion, and basically every superhero movie ever, the lives of everyone on Earth are under threat. But the stakes don't always have to be about putting everyone's lives at risk. Sometimes what is at stake is just happiness. Like in The Pursuit of Happiness. We never fear for Chris's life, but we are drawn into his struggle of pursuing happiness. What seems like a low stake there is actually huge, because we've gone on this journey with him. We care emotionally about his character, so we want him to find happiness. Similarly, in the film Hope Springs, it's Tommy Lee Jones and Meryl Streep's happiness that is at stake. Sorry, their marriage that is at stake. Their marriage is their world, so the end of the world is at stake, and with it, their happiness. So all of this is a lot to accomplish in 25 pages. That's why there's no room for side trips, no allowance for squandering, and no allowance for not planning your script. Sketching out what is in this act will help you enormously and save a lot of time and effort later. And I know this because, as I said, I've written a lot of incomprehensible screenplays. So at the end of this first act, the protagonist has to step out of his comfortable world in order to solve the problem, right? The problem being the second act of the movie. He thinks he's going to solve it and get back to his comfort zone without too much problems, but he doesn't know what you have in store for him in the second act. So at the end of this act, the protagonist commits to the journey. And at the end of Act 1, what do we have to know? We have to know who the character is, their goal, and the antagonist or the antagonistic force that's standing in their way. And this clash of intentions is the source of conflict in your screenplay. Every scene you write must have its own motive, intention, and goal, because these things advance the story. And you can test this by writing a scene and then removing it. And if that scene is removed, does it leave a hole in your screenplay or your plot? And similarly, you can think of, when you're thinking about all of this structure, you can think of it in terms of a logline. The logline is just a simple sentence which embodies all these things: protagonist, goal, and the force that's standing in their way. And I found that when I'm outlining a script, writing the logline at the beginning is very helpful for me to understand what it's about and what the goal is. Act 2 is the fun and games. It's the center and centerpiece of your script. This is the guts of your movie, the adventure. It embodies the theme of your story through the personal journey of your hero as he changes and grows in order to defeat the antagonist. These middle pages are basically the part of your movie that everyone will remember, because everyone can relate. Everyone has tried to figure out their life or fallen in love, and it's the most important part. The first and third acts can still succeed if they are flawed, but if the second act is flawed, your movie will fail. And the second act is the hardest part of the script because it's so long. But if you outline it, you can really help yourself. So this is where the odds become greater and the defeats more profound. Your character goes through defeat, he re-examines his life, he loses faith, he finds faith. He was willing to change, he almost gives up, but he stays and he fights the fight. And at the end of Act 2, he's basically standing at the foot of life or death. And Act 3 begins as your hero faces the final challenge. At this point, he engages in the fight of his life. And this could be with swords on a pirate ship or with words of love. It can be with anything. It's the final culmination of events. Up to this point, the hero in your story has basically tried everything he could. He's tried and failed. There's only one way left because all the alternatives have been tested. It's the final culmination of plot, story. It's where everything collides and propels the hero into the new confrontation. And that confrontation is the obligatory scene at the end of the third act. Oh, sorry, not at the end of the third act, but in the third act. It's the scene, that scene we've all been waiting for. The scene that is promised to the audience when everything is wrapped up, like the boy gets the girl. You can also think of structure like this, and this really helped me. So these are basically 7 pressure points of your script. At the inciting incident, this is where everything begins. Everything before the inciting incident is prologue. End of Act 1, protagonist commits to the plan. Act 2 is the plan. Obstacles, it's obvious the first plan doesn't work. Significant complications. This is the midpoint. This is where the story sort of takes a change in direction. I don't know if you've seen His Girl Friday, but the midpoint in that movie is when Hildy discovers that her real dream is to be a great reporter, not a typical woman in the home. So it's usually when there's a reverse. End of Act 2, adjustments and brief victories, but always a spiral downward after the midpoint. And then end of Act 2 is like ritual death, or it could be metaphorical death, but it's a low point. And the final confrontation is where everything is resolved. Sorry, jumped ahead. So how the hell do we write all of this in a cohesive screenplay? While putting in emotion, while wanting people to read it. So here are some things to think about. The first one is concept. Groundhog Day is a film about a wacky weatherman forced to relive one strange day over and over again until he gets it right. The Truman Show is about an insurance salesman who discovers his life is actually a TV show. These are big movie concepts. The idea for your movie has to be easily understood. It has to be sellable. You need to be able to tell it to people in a few lines because it's an advertising tool. And a lot of films have high concepts: relatable situation, character flaw, transforming event, fresh take on a familiar idea, and an ironic twist. A high concept premise is where a serial killer takes down his victims based on the violation of the 7 deadly sins. I personally like using the example of Mrs. Doubtfire. I don't know if you've all seen that movie. I hope you have. I've seen it many times. It has all these things. It has the relatable situation of a father wanting to take care of his kids. The character flaw of the father being so flawed that he can't take care of his kids. The transforming event is that he basically chooses between his flaw and an opportunity. And the opportunity is the fresh take because he decides to dress up as a woman. And the ironic twist is that the father has to pretend to be someone else in order to be a father. And this is higher concept, like Snakes on a Plane, Mars Attacks. Every film has to have a strong core. Many screenplays fail because they lack a core idea. I like using the example of Kramer versus Kramer. It has a very strong message about love and family, and those are the ties that keep us together. Kramer versus Kramer is about a man who's just divorced, who has to learn to take care of his son, and then must fight to keep custody of him. So this is a strong core, and Mrs. Doubtfire also has a very strong core of love and family. And I'm going to show a clip from Mrs. Doubtfire. Again, I don't know who's seen the movie. Okay, so basically everyone. So I'm going to show you, this is basically the obligatory scene in the third act, the confrontation scene, where I can't remember Sally Field's character's name, but she sees Daniel sort of in his element for the first time and understands what he's done and why he's done it. And they really connect. For the first time, really, they connect on an emotional level, but they still clash. Okay. You can really study Mrs. Doubtfire in every one of these concepts that I'm talking about, core, connection, we're going to see in a minute. It has such a strong message, and this scene, I think, is really interesting because she sort of sees for the first time the potential that Daniel has with her kids and with her. And as she says, he's the best thing that's happened to them. Movies are emotion pictures. The most important thing in life is to connect with other people. So you have to think about who and what your audience connects to. Emotion has to be the core of every story. If you care about the movie, it's basically because you connected emotionally with it. And I don't know, how many people have seen Stand By Me? Okay, not that many. It's surprising. But Stand By Me is a great family film from Rob Reiner. It's an 80s film written by Stephen King and adapted from his novel, The Body. And I like showing a scene from Stand By Me as well because it has a great core and connection. It has great friendships between the four boys. And I'm going to show the scene where Chris is let down by his teacher. I think this is a very strong scene in the film. It's the first time where we see Gordy connect with Chris. And for those people who haven't seen it, it's the first time where one of the friends connects with his best friend on an emotional level, sort of for the first time, and sort of sees deeply into his character and his trauma. So I think this scene and this film are so memorable because Chris is the tough guy. We see Chris tell us about a moment where he was let down by his teacher, and I think a moment where a child is let down by an adult is very impactful. And this film, every scene is like that. Every scene connects us and allows us to care about each character. And all the four boys really relate to one another. And I just think this film is incredibly memorable. You know how everyone has a film that they saw when they were a child that they think back to as an adult. And I saw this when I was quite young, and I use it all the time in my screenwriting. It's a great film to study. So there are no films without characters. No characters, no movies. Your main character, your protagonist, he has to be strong enough to carry the whole movie, strong and interesting enough. He has to be obsessed with something and have the energy to face the obstacles. Usually a great protagonist is an underdog, so that the goal is very difficult to achieve. Your character has to want something strongly, and usually it has a feel of a life or death situation. The character you put in your story couldn't possibly achieve that goal. You can have the most exciting roller coaster adventure movie, but if your audience aren't hooked on the characters, they basically won't be hooked on the movie. And an important thing to remember when you're writing characters is that there's no such thing as a perfect person. A perfect character is a boring character. Everyone is spectacularly flawed, so you have to write those flaws. Your character has to be likable enough to entertain us, but flawed enough that we want to see them grow and learn. Stick to the basics. Give me a character who I can identify with, I can learn from, I have a compelling reason to follow, who I believe deserves to win, and has stakes that are primal and ring true for me, like in Mrs. Doubtfire. Okay, so who's this? The Joker from Batman. Amelie? Little Miss Sunshine? Silence of the Lambs? I shouldn't have put this on there, so obvious, and Harry Potter is not a character, it's an empire institution. Yeah. So, you know, you can use, these are all incredibly famous movies, but we all know the characters, and we remember the character from the movie. And I didn't put Robin Williams there as Mrs. Doubtfire, but he should be there. Okay, so let's go to crisis. A crisis is when a stranger arrives in town, or Dorothy is swept away in a tornado. A crisis starts the movie. This is the inciting incident. A crisis starts the movie, and then there have to be these little mini crises that happen in every scene in order to advance your story. The scenes have to have conflict. And the first crisis can come out of the blue, but every complication that happens after that stems from this one crisis. And then we have confrontation, the final scene that we've been waiting for the entire movie, the obligatory scene that's anticipated from the first act. And clarity. This one I took a while to believe this one because, as I said, when I was writing incomprehensible scripts, I didn't realize that I was writing something that was incomprehensible until I started learning about clarity. Ambiguity might be good, confusion is not. You have to think of your scripts as clear, coherent stories. If it's not clear in your head, it's not clear to anyone. And then, of course, conflict. And this can come in many forms. Conflict is crucial to maintaining the audience's interest in the story. And these are scene elements that you should think of when you're writing every scene in your script. What's the purpose of the scene? What's the goal of the characters in the scene? The attitude of the characters before the scene begins. This is like a little checklist. And if you actually apply this to screenwriting, it'll help you with clarity. These are 5 elements that every scene must have. Take us deeper emotionally, enhance the conflict, advance the story, reverse expectations, and set up future scene. This is the tiers method. And something that's common with new writers and film school graduates is this fear of failure. What if everything I write sucks? I'm overwhelmed by the blank page. I'm paralyzed by the blank page. I hate writing. I suck. Now, I had this thought when I graduated from AFI. I was completely paralyzed because all this stuff I've been telling you, I was told it every day for 2 years. And it made me sort of hate writing. And it made me so stressed. And every time I would look at the blank page, I would just be completely overwhelmed. So one day I basically had an epiphany. And this is what I told myself. I gave myself an out. I told myself that I didn't have to be brilliant. Because I will probably never achieve brilliance. So it's okay to write garbage. You learn from bad writing. And I put the 50 Shades of Grey here thing kind of as a joke, but not really, right? If you can write something like 50 Shades of Grey, you'll be a millionaire. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just write your story and leave the brilliant work to the dead. And there are more than one great thing about writing, but one great thing about writing is that you will always improve. The most important thing that writers have to do is write. The scripts that you will write this year the scripts that you write next year will be better than the ones you write this year. Keep going, keep writing, and your skills will improve, but only if you're actually sitting down and doing it. Don't get distracted. If you start writing one story, finish your story, because you learn nothing from a half-finished script. And I think these are the most important things to learn or to remember when you're writing your script, is to have a routine. Even if you have a full-time job, you can always find time to write. If you have to get up at 5 o'clock and write till 8 o'clock and then go to work from 9 to 5 or whatever, you can make it work. If you outline. No, you can make it work. And there's this book, I don't know if you know the author Blake Snyder. He wrote this book called Save the Cat. It's actually called Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. And it really is the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. He came up with this beat sheet formula that works very well, and it's a sort of easy way to outline, especially when you're just starting. You have to be incredibly original in your idea for a movie, but it does have to be formula at the beginning. You have to think of your movie as a trailer that you can explain in 30 seconds. Movies like that all have the same structure. This is kind of a simple way to express it. If you take a guy and put him up a tree, you throw rocks at him, and then finally at the end you get him down from the tree. Now, I'm not telling you guys to all write formula movies, but there's no art without craft of screenwriting, and if you learn the craft, then you can go off and write all that experimental stuff, or like whatever style you want to write. But learning the craft and learning how to structure a well-formatted sort of studio script is really beneficial. Movies like Die Hard, The Matrix, Casablanca, all these movies are about a hero who's pulled against his will in a situation and then who end up winning. That's structure. And I think structure can be liberating because it does give you less to worry about. Use your resources. It's easy to read screenplays. And I actually just added this in today because I went to a YouTube seminar last week because I'm not very media savvy. So I decided to go to this seminar. And you can actually subscribe to all these channels on YouTube where you can watch screenwriters giving lectures, and it has a lot of really helpful stuff. And these are the ones that I've been listening to and watching. And obviously, take notes, take a notebook around, go to the library, listen to what your friends are saying. This is all dialogue, and this is all inspiration. Thanks for having me. Okay, great.
Questions?
So what is your method for getting out of like a rut if you are completely uncreative, you're stuck on a story?
Yep.
What do you do?
I get up and walk away. And I actually just discovered this. I was having problems with one of my scripts, and I would just like literally stare at the blank page for like hours, and I would just become incredibly miserable and horrible to be around. And then it's part of this like giving myself an out thing. I just got up and walked away. I went to do something. I went to have coffee with a friend. I walked outside. I just bought a jump rope. So I would go outside and like use the jump rope for 5 minutes, and then a solution would come into my mind. Usually when I have a problem, the solution comes when I'm not looking at the page. It'll usually be when I'm driving, or I'm in the shower, or I'm like swimming laps, because that's when you're thinking of the story in the back of your mind instead of like, I have to sit here and write this story right now, because that's not a natural environment. That's like stressing your brain to write something when it's not ready. So I'm usually thinking about it all the time, and then I take notes when I think of something, and then when I actually get to the computer, I can just type it. Yeah.
Where do you find inspiration for your work?
That's a good question. I guess from people I know. As I said, I usually carry around a notebook, and I write down a lot of stuff that my friends say. And I actually sometimes record it. And that's fine. You can record your friends without them knowing. That's really helpful for dialogue. No, I'm totally being serious. But like in terms of getting inspiration for a whole story, I don't know. I write comedy, so I don't know where you get inspiration for comedy. I come from a filmmaking family, and my parents are very into serious films, like serious cancer, like horrible, like Still Alice, which is a great film, but it's incredibly hard to watch. Those types of films are the ones that they're always talking about and seeing. And I like the opposite type of film. So I get inspiration by discussing what I don't like with people, because then I think of the opposite. And I had a really long conversation about Still Alice with my dad. And then I went home and thought, I never want to be the writer of that movie. I just want to write something for entertainment. And so then I start thinking of what actually makes me smile. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, that actually did, yeah.
But like, for a while I thought, because my parents are like so into serious drama and everything, I thought like I have to be like them, because otherwise I won't be a serious writer. That's not true. Comedy can be, you're a serious writer if you write comedy. That's what I'll keep telling myself.
You mentioned Stand By Me and Mrs. Doubtfire. What other films do you admire for their screenplays?
What other screenplays do I like?
Yeah.
I really like Knocked Up, the screenplay for that. See, you're all laughing because, like, why should I like that? But no, I think that's a great script. I think all of Judd Apatow's scripts are really great. Forgetting Sarah Marshall by Jason Segel and directed by Nicholas Stoller is a really great screenplay. I love the screenplay for The Kids Are All Right. That's a great one to study. Crazy Heart is a great script. Stand By Me is actually a great script to read and study. And yeah, that was the question,
Did Rob
right?
Reiner also do the screenplay for Stand By Me?
Sorry, what was that?
Did Rob Reiner do the screenplay for Stand By Me?
Stephen King did the screenplay.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he usually doesn't It doesn't adapt his screenplay or his stories, but yeah, he did. Yeah.
In class, when we talk about, because I taught screenwriting for a very long time, and now I don't, but I teach my students how to write screenplays anyway. One of the things we talk about as an icebreaker is genre, and how genre is also a formula of convention plus invention. And so if you apply that to some of the things you were saying about how they can look at formula as a tool or as a way into writing, and they're always worried about formula versus leading to formulaic work.
Yeah.
So can you talk about maybe a little bit deeper about how they can use that formula of formula plus invention in their work? So if you follow the structure that we're all familiar with, you are following the formula, but what is it that's special or different, and how do they get to what's special and different? If you're writing science fiction, you're writing science fiction, but why do I see your film? What's different about it?
I just think that if you sort of, this is what happened to me. Like I was always interested in writing, and I never had any tools. Even though I came from a filmmaking family, I'd never sort of really like read screenplays or anything. And I always just had these like random ideas for scripts. But once I learned the formula, it just allowed me to be more creative, because I could write something with this kind of like set outline and then deviate from that. But I couldn't deviate before I had the outline, because then I was just like making myself crazy. So like for me, once you learn the formula, then you can throw away the formula.
So learn the rules before you break them?
Sorry?
So learn the rules before you break them?
There's no rules.
It's just an expression. Except for Jake. Not a question, but a comment. I was so pleased to see I Love Sarah Jane on your example up there. I use that in every class, so it's a great one.
Oh, was that on one of the slides? Yeah.
It's an Australian film.
Yeah. Actually, there's a YouTube channel called Blue Tongue Films, and you can see all of their films, like Spider, Bear, I Love Sarah Jane, yeah.
You mentioned that there needs to be some pain that you pull from. Is that the case with comedy writing as well as with serious writing?
Absolutely.
And if so, how do you incorporate that?
I think that's a really tough question. It's sort of different for everyone. This might be too much information, but I'll say that 4 years ago I found out that I had a brother, a 14-year-old brother, who lived 10 minutes away from my house in LA. This was a kind of crazy situation, obviously, and a big like revelation in my family. But I sort of turned that into a comedy about a British academic professor who finds out that he has a second family on the other side of the world. So I kind of just flipped what happened to me. It was a form of therapy for me to try to flip the story. So like how I sort of use trauma is to basically just laugh at it. And putting in those like big ideas into the script is me sort of making sense of it in my head, and then looking at the situation for what it is, like a really unusual, crazy family situation. And then thinking like, I'm actually waking up every day laughing about this. Does that kind of... Yeah.
Other questions? Just slide that all.
You said you're like, you said you're from Australia and then you went to AFI. So could you just talk about like what led you to AFI and what you had to do to get into AFI and what that kind of experience was like?
Yeah, basically I grew up in Sydney acting. I started acting when I was 8 and I stopped when I was 17. So I thought I was going to move to LA to be an actor, and then I realized that was crazy. But basically I started producing when I was in high school and university, just doing short films. And there were no great film schools in Australia at the time, and I don't think there are still. So I just Googled AFI one day, where I was looking at film schools like Columbia in New York and things like that. And I found out about AFI, and basically I submitted a short script and an essay, and then I flew to LA for the interview. So it was kind of a quick process. And I was 21 when I started AFI. So I was like the youngest person in my year, and I don't advise that. Most people tend to be like 27 to 30 in their first year because it's so demanding. So if I could go back and do it now, I probably would. But sorry, that was beside the point. Yeah, I just wanted to move to LA and I wanted to go to film school, and I heard that, and I needed the time to develop my writing, so I needed a 2-year program. So that was what led me to that.
Would you recommend then for students to go out and work before starting graduate school, work for a while?
Yeah, I definitely would. I would recommend getting a lot of on-set experience. Because AFI is so rigorous and busy from day one that if you don't have experience, you're kind of like one of those weird kids that no one wants on their set. So having as much...
And that's a somewhat self-selecting process in terms of crewing all of the cycle films and the thesis films.
Yeah, you have to crew on all the short films and all the thesis films. And it actually takes a lot of time away from writing. So that's why having a routine is really good, and that's why the whole getting up at 5 a.m. thing you start doing that at AFI, and then hopefully you continue doing it. I found that there are lots of times in the middle of the night where you can write.
Any last question? Okay, well, thank you very much, Trilby.
Thank you. Thank you so much.